Hi there, I'm Dr. Megan Connell, and this is Psychology at the Table. Recently, I asked for some questions to do a Q&A video with on Twitter, and boy, did I get a lot of responses. So this is going to be the first in probably a short series of videos where I try to answer as many questions as I can that I got on Twitter. As a reminder, Psychology at the Table is a series about how to run games for your friends and family. So running games at your local game store or in your living room. This isn't a series about how to run therapeutic games. That's a different skill set altogether. I say this just because some of the questions I was given were more about running therapeutic games, I think, than running games for your friends and family. And so I just want to be clear here that we're talking more about layman's tools and ways that we can use psychology and a little bit of psychological knowledge to help us be more inclusive at our gaming tables. So let's jump into our questions. Our first question is from Torn Pixie, who asked what to do about overtalking and players who ignore one another. I think in an interview I did with Chris Lindsay at GameholeCon, he answered this question really, really well. He talked about how to direct the energy at the table, noting that you can use your body language and just your presence when someone else is trying to interrupt a player to not even look at them, just to focus on the person who's talking and to give that full undivided energy. It's a really great interview. I highly suggest checking that out. A few other things that we can do, though, is there can be something like a talking totem. My friend BJ Hemsley uses this. She has a unicorn that you have to be holding in order to be the one talking or to be the on player at that moment. So something like that can work really well, again, for more of a face-to-face live game. Another thing that's a little uncomfortable but can be important is just to enforce things at your table, to call out behaviors that you want to see and to correct the behaviors that you don't want to see. So if you're listening to one player and another player keeps trying to jump in, just to say, hold on, I hear that you have an idea. So-and-so is talking right now. I want to let them finish and have their time. And then let them finish, have their time, and then go, okay, what was it that you wanted to say? And this really models the behaviors that we want to see at the table, that we want people to be able to talk and feel heard and listened and respected. So be ready to model that and to correct the behaviors that are happening around the table. Remember, running a game is people management, and managing people isn't always easy. So it's hard at times, but if we can do that hard work, it can pay off by having a smoother game in the long run. Our next set of questions was from Max Younger, who had two questions. Their first question had to do with players metagaming by looking up monster stats and how to handle that and what to do with it. Look, it's super easy to metagame nowadays. Like, as soon as we know what type of monster we're looking at, I know there's that desire to want to pull up your browser and look it up. Pull up D&D Beyond and see, like, what are the stats of this thing? How are we going to get out of it? And as much as we can, we got to resist doing that because our characters don't have that knowledge. Our characters would have no way of knowing what that thing is. And so one of the things that we need to remember is rewards work better than punishments. So when a player is able to resist the temptation of metagaming, not just by not looking it up, but by acting against the knowledge that they have. So for example, if the player knows that this creature is resistant to fire, but they know their character doesn't know that and would use their fire spell, and they use their fire spell anyway, hand them an inspiration dice. Pick up a d6 and say, this is your DM inspiration dice. You just did awesome by not metagaming there. I'm really excited by that. So use that d6 to add to whatever you want. Doing things like that can really increase those types of behaviors that you want to see. And the bigger the temptation to metagame and the more they're able to resist it, up that dice value. You know, like for a little bit of resistance, it's a D4. For really, really doing something big that is not optimal and resisted that temptation to metagame, give them that D12. It can be really fun to do that. And of course, another alternative is we can always reskin monsters. We can take the stats for one thing and call it something else. We could turn a stow giant into an ogre. We can turn an ogre into an orc. We can turn an orc into a goblin. You know, we get to decide that. In our world, we get to determine things. If your players are getting mad because the orcs aren't acting the way the orcs are supposed to in the monster manual, just remind them that it's your game and you get to create the world as you want it to be. And not to metagame and not to look this stuff up because their characters wouldn't have a reason to look those things up. Max's second question had to do with discovering each player's fundamental needs in the story and then how to address them in the game. I'm going to bring this back to what I was talking about with emotionally driven games a few weeks ago, where we talked about finding those characters' emotional growth edges and working on helping to give story elements for the characters to grow in the different ways that we want to. And honestly, one of the best ways to do this is just to talk to the player, just to ask them, where does this character need to grow? Where do you want to see them go? What life skills do you want them to develop? What kind of relationships do you want them to see? and just use that information of where the player wants their character to go to help create the story elements to get that character to rise up in those different ways. So if the character needs to learn how to trust, creating scenarios where the team has to work together. If they're too trusting, maybe creating a few scenarios where an NPC betrays the party. Helping to give the opportunities for those growth edges for the characters. Remember, it's up to the player to decide if their character has been through enough to grow or not, but we can give those opportunities to have those moments where they can grow and develop. Honey and Dice asked what to do about distractions such as phones at the gaming table. This is a really great Session Zero topic of talking about how much distractibility you're comfortable with as a game master. And so some are totally fine with people having their phones out, playing other games while they're DMing, or playing, or chatting, or looking at memes, or whatever. Other people want everybody super focused for the entire time we're there. You want to tell your players what your expectation is, and then to enforce that expectation. If people are being distracted, a polite reminder of like, hey, please, I have for phones away, or you're just redirecting in that way. Now, look, one thing just to remember, sometimes when we enforce our boundaries, even if the players know that it's a boundary there and that they violated it, reminding them of that might not go over so well. They might not like it. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but just be prepared that when we enforce our boundaries, people aren't always jumping up and celebrating that. But it's really important to enforce the boundaries. If you have said no phones at the table, no exceptions, and people are not respecting that, by you reinforcing it and helping people to adhere to that guideline for your game, it creates a sense of safety for players so they know that the expectations and the rules are going to be maintained, they are going to be enforced. It's hard work, but so is game mastering in general. Our next question comes from Artworks, who was asking about how to build team chemistry, noting that people who are good friends, even outside of games, sometimes can have a really hard time getting their characters to connect with one another. This is another great Session Zero topic to talk about how the players are going to be together as a group. One of the things I typically will say to my players is, it's up to you to create the reason why your character is staying with these other characters. I don't want to be hearing my character has no reason to be here, or my character doesn't trust people and works alone. It's like, well, you knew this game was a cooperative team game, so why are you creating this lone wolf character? I don't like that. I try to nip that in the bud right at Session Zero. If you haven't seen the role-playing game Fiasco, check that game out. It is a role-playing game where you play without a game master, and everybody crafts a story together. They craft their backstories, they make their characters all at the same time, and they draw these connections with everybody else around the table. It's really cool to see that system, and that's been adapted actually by Sly Flourish in the Lazy Dungeon Master Returns and the Lazy Dungeon Master for D&D specifically, or fantasy role-playing games specifically, where you create a strong bond to one other person in the party and a weak bond to somebody else. So a strong bond might be we're siblings. We served in the same army unit together. A weak bond might be we grew up in the same town, or we once apprenticed together, or something like that. Having those connections can really help a party come together and have a reason to stick together. For further information on group dynamics, I would refer back to an interview I did with Dr. Heidi Lumbrunner about the different stages that groups go through. I think that's a really useful thing to look at, because we have to remember that our gaming group, the players, go through those stages, but so do the characters. And so to be able to think about that forming, norming, storming, performing stages, and understanding where your players and where their characters are on those different levels of group dynamics can really help you understand what's going on at the table and better manage all of that. We next come to Lily Smith, who had 3 questions, which I'll try to get through all. The first one was about perspective taking, particularly when people maybe aren't getting a joke or understanding what's going on, and maybe getting feelings hurt or something like that. I think that's another important thing where we have to be managing the energy around the table and noting what's going on. And also creating a place where it's okay to ask what's happening without judgment and without people, jumping down your throat. For example, like if you're reading through what your spell does and something happened and everybody's laughing and you're looking around confused, being able to just ask what just happened there is really important, because then the players feel safe, like they can ask those types of questions and understand really what's going on. Another thing to do, though, is as the Dungeon Master, be willing to ask for yourself, even if you don't need to. So if you notice that all but one of the players have gotten a joke and one of them isn't laughing, bond with the one who isn't laughing and just be like, hey, wait, what's going on here? What just happened? Sorry, guys, what's funny? I was looking something up and I missed it. Rather than saying, hey, it looks like Joe missed what you guys are talking about. Can you repeat the joke? That doesn't feel good for the person to be called out like that. So if we can bring that back on ourselves and just go, I don't know what's happening, please fill me in. Even if you do, it's okay. That way we're getting everybody to be on the same page at the gaming table. The second question that they had was about players who are constantly interrupting the narrative to go and look for loot. So like looking through smashing every clay pot inside of the ruin to try and find something. In my experience, behaviors like that come from playing computer-based role-playing games such as like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild, where you really are rewarded for searching through every little nook and cranny. And when I see players doing that, I do actually explicitly tell them like, hey guys, this isn't a computer role-playing game. Stuff hasn't been pre-programmed in. The NPCs don't spawn when you go into the cave. They're already there. And maybe if you're trying to explore this field and find hidden treasure in the field, the enemies that you're supposed to be going to find are watching you. And they know now exactly what you're doing and what's going on. That can help players kind of go, oh, this is different, and understand that they're thinking and globalizing what they learned from a computer-based role-playing game might not be as useful as they thought it was going to be in the beginning. Another thing to do is just to ask narratively why the player would be doing that. So if they're saying, okay, my character's going to go through this field looking for treasure, just to go, I'm curious, why is your character doing that? Your character's been hired to go take care of this goblin cave that's right over there. They can see it. So, you know, when they've been hired to do something, why are they stopping to do the thing they've been hired to do and check through this field? And that can really kind of help the players start to understand that things are a little different than a computer-based game. Their third question was what to do when player conflict becomes character conflict. So when two players don't like each other, and then during the game they have their characters fight with one another. Look, the basic thing with this is you gotta talk to your players. If it's one player picking on another player, you pull that player aside and you talk to them and ask them about what's going on and what behaviors you expect around the table and how to appropriately address those issues at the table. I don't want to manipulate the game. I don't want to have punishment stuff happening in game. This is an out-of-game problem and we want to have a solution out of game. And so this is talking to those players away from everybody else and trying to come up with a way for them to either play together or understand that they can't, and then either having one or both of them leave the table. It's never fun to ask people to leave your gaming group. We don't like doing that, but sometimes that's the best solution. If somebody's dragging everybody else's fun down because they can't let go of something, it's not worth keeping them in the group then. We play D&D for fun. We're doing this because we enjoy it and we want to make sure that we're all having an enjoyable experience. Now look, if it's a misunderstanding that's going on, if somebody's angry because of something the characters did, we can address that too. We could say, all right, you're looking really angry right now. Is that you're acting in character angry, or are you actually like angry and frustrated? And if the person's actually angry and frustrated, we pause and we talk about that. Our brain doesn't operate very well when we're angry. It actually starts to shut down and we can't think as well. And so if we're seeing stuff like that happen, we want to nip it in the bud and we want to, again, people manage while we're running the game. All right, I think that will do for all the questions for this round. We've got a lot more questions, and so I'll try to do a few more of these Q&A videos coming up. I hope these answers were helpful to you. I have links down the doobly-doo to the different videos I've talked about. And as always, let's make space at the table for everyone.